How's it going? And welcome back to the Pokemon Unite video here on YouTube. It's been a little while, about 6 weeks, since I did an updated tier list. So today I wanted to go through that, give my opinions on Delphox in the metagame, as well as the number of characters that have had buffs and nerfs over the last 6 weeks. I usually break these tier list videos into a separate solo queue and 5-stack component. However, the 5-stack competitive metagame is still just dominated by Blissey and Hoopa, with some minor details changing, but largely that's more of the same. So I'm going to skip going over that until they decide to address those characters. However, there's been a number of things that have shifted around from a solo queue perspective. So let's go ahead and dive on in to my thoughts on this. Before I pull the list up here, I would just like to remind folks, I always approach the full solo queue tier list from the perspective of you are playing completely by yourself with no additional teammates. So there's asterisks next to some of the ratings on the defender and support characters in this list, especially because those characters can be very good in duos or trios, or in solos if you happen to get a good carry that you can support or defend. However, those roles are pretty high variance because they depend on your teammates being in the right spot. So my tier lists in general tend to rank characters that are able to carry games on their own more highly, because it kind of lets you take your destiny into your own hands. Without further ado, this is where I'm at with the current solo queue tier list for Pokemon Unite, with the biggest winner of the patch definitely being Absol here. This character is already pretty close to playable. It pathed okay, it was excellent coming out of the center at level 5, and it got a number of strict upgrades in the most recent patch that make it just an absolute monster into anything squishy, and honestly, even some of the tankier characters in the game. Dragonite was a character that was always floating somewhere in the upper echelon for me personally, thanks to the powerful secure that its Hyper Beam can provide in those solo queue games, and they gave it a flat attack stat increase across the board, I think kicking it up into one of the higher tiers, especially when you consider it passed well early. Cinderace is probably the only character in this S tier that I think doesn't contest last hits and top or bottom path well. However, it's just so powerful in the late game engagements, especially if you can get the central area for it, that I think Cinderace definitely belongs in the S tier. Its Unite move especially can give you good secure for objectives if you hold it for that, and the incredible amount of mobilities Blaze Kick and Flame Shard provide just lets you outplay a lot of people. Similarly, Greninja is a character that can just kind of pick fights up and carry them across the finish line on its own, and Surf especially is a great secure move if you're good with that attack. Venusaur is probably the character that plays top or bottom path the best out of all of these, and it's a character that's capable of, if you're landing big Giga Drain, surviving a very long time in fights in the late game. As we get down into the A tier, I think all of these characters are pretty good at carrying games in different ways, but they'll have some pretty medium matchups into some other specific characters. Decidueye could maybe be justified in B tier because I think it does have a kind of medium matchup into Absol. That being said, Spirit Shackle Decidueye I think is one of the best characters in the game for stealing last hits on objectives. Your team can be completely behind and you just kind of do a drive-by with Spirit Shackle if the opposing team doesn't have good vision, snipe an objective like Zapdos, and ultimately win the game for your team. So I do think it deserves to be an A if you're playing it well, especially. Greedent and Aegislash are characters that can both brawl one-on-one and get into larger team fights well, and they both have good objectives secure also, which I think puts them solidly into A. Machamp probably has one of, if not the most impactful Unite moves in the game if you line it up well, and it can definitely swing entire team fights all on its own, so it's a great character to be playing in full solo queue. Similarly, Charizard has one of those big Unite moves, but similar to Cinderace, it really struggles in top or bottom path, and I've put it into A because I think it's honestly unplayable outside of the central area. So if you can get the central area with Charizard, you're going to have a really good time and have control of your games, but you're going to really struggle for the first 5 or 6 minutes if you're in top or bottom path usually. Pikachu and Ninetales are probably two of the best early path characters in the game, and these are characters that if you get a decent lane partner especially, you could get an early advantage and snowball it throughout the entire course of the game. The buff to Pikachu's Unite move in the most recent patch especially gave it a lot of survivability and extra power in the mid to late game situations when you're popping off with your Unite, so I think it firmly belongs in A tier. Slowbro, one of the only defender characters alongside Greedent here in the A tier, because the bug fix buff to Scald recently honestly makes this character feel like it's in a similar category to Pikachu at Ninetales. It's disruptive, and it's also capable of putting out very large amounts of damage. As we get down into B tier, these characters are a mix of either just a little bit low on the total power level or have a variety of matchups that are hard. Talonflame, I think, gets a spot in B tier because its Fly and Brave Bird are both pretty good at securing objectives, which can let you steal games that you otherwise would be losing. However, the rest of this character's kit, I think, is a little bit middling. Its overall damage in comparison to other assassin characters like Absol especially definitely leaves a lot to be desired. Duraludon, again, makes it into B tier for its secure potential with its Dragon Pulse. Its Unite move, however powerful, is very easily disrupted though, and this is another character that's pretty squishy with medium matchups into things like Absol. Same story on Gardevoir. Even with the buffs, these squishy characters that lack mobility, I think, are a hard sell if there's a lot of assassins running around. Gengar, I think, is pretty close to being reasonable on its own. It has poorer matchups into opposing teams that are thicker because it's harder to get your Dream Eater and Shadow Ball resets when you're not knocking people out right away. However, if there's a lot of squishy Pokemon on the opposing team, Gengar, played well, can definitely rip through things. Espeon, despite its buffs, I think tends to be largely worse than Pikachu or Ninetales as far as disruptive attackers go. It does get its Unite move a little bit earlier than these others, which can let you be a little bit more impactful at first dread. But I think from level 9 and up, I would much rather be Pikachu or Ninetales rather than Espeon. Cramorant's a tough one overall. I think you can make an argument to put Cramorant up into A because the Dive Air Slash build can be powerful, but I think this is also another character because you need to get in on people. It was probably made a little bit worse by Absol being popular inside of the format, so I put it down in B here, and I think this is probably a decent place for it to be overall. Delphox is an interesting kit. So it's definitely weaker than Pikachu, Ninetales, and Espeon early as far as disruptive attackers go, but the fact that it has the fastest Unite recharge in the game means when you hit that level 9 power spike, you get to have a really big impact inside of team fights. You can usually Unite almost once per minute. That being said, I don't think Delphox is quite powerful enough to be worth having it in your central area, and there's going to be a lot of games with Delphox where you're a little bit behind early because it's not especially strong, and you don't get your Unite move until like the 5 or 6 minute mark, and when you're not getting that Unite move at level 9 early, you lose out on a big part of this character's power, so I think it's a little bit of a high variance pick in solo queue, especially if you're not always getting that first Dreadnought. Azumarill, I think, happily climbs up into B tier for this patch. It got a number of really small, strict upgrades. This actually has similar problems to Delphox in that it has a rapidly recharging Unite move that it doesn't get to level 9. That's definitely one of the best things about its kit. And if you hit that power spike early and you get to do 3 or 4 Unite moves over the course of the game, you're going to have a really good time. However, if you struggle to get to that level 9 quickly, you're going to be missing out a big part of what makes this character powerful, so it makes it a little bit of high variance gameplay. Garchomp is really good at ripping through people, but it also is squishy-ish compared to a lot of the other melee characters that want to be brawling, so I've got it down in B tier here because I think its overall kit is just a little bit on the weaker side. Lucario is a character that's obviously a menace inside of 5 stacks, but I often find it to be a little bit lackluster inside of solo queue. Lucario in particular is a character that really excels at getting ahead early and then pushing that advantage throughout the course of the rest of the game. And in solo queue, it's so easy for your teammates to give up whatever early advantage you've accrued that it feels like it's difficult to really capitalize on what makes Lucario powerful inside of solo queue because of that. I will die by the opinion that Crit Hit Crustle is semi-real, could arguably be inside of A tier in this tier list. I think Shell Smash plus either Stealth Rocks or X-Scissor with the critical hit build lets you brawl, it lets you get around the map, and it's more than fine, and I am proud to put it in the B tier at a minimum. Zarina's Unite move is especially powerful right now into a lot of these squishier characters into S tier. That being said, they did pull a little bit of damage overall out of her Stomp move, and she's mechanically a harder character to play on top of that. And there are some hard counters to her if your opponents are running full heal, or if there's something like a Blissey or Wigglytuff on the opposing team that can regularly get your Unite move canceled. There's a lot of counterplay to her, so I think even though she has some really high upside games, she also has some really middling games, so I dropped her here into B tier. Sylveon, I think, is another character that kind of all these squishier characters or like medium thickness characters all got a bit worse with Absol getting more popular, and sadly, even though I love Sylveon, I think that includes her. Even the Hyper Voice build just kind of get cut through by Assassin if they get up on top of you. Hoopa, while still dominating the competitive metagame, has had more power pulled out of its Unite move yet again, meaning it's not quite the same carry monster inside of solo queue games that it once was. It's definitely still reasonable if you like the character, and I think it's definitely the best support character that you can be playing in solo queues because the Unite does still give you some amount of damage, but it ain't quite what she used to be. Trevenant, a character that's incredibly durable and I think pretty decent into Absol that can also put up decent damage numbers if you're doing things like attack weight stacking at it. I think it's a defender that definitely belongs in the B tier. The bottom rung of characters here, sans Zeraora, who's still just like the only character in the game that still doesn't get its Unite move until level 10, are just defenders here that can't really carry fights on their own. Blastoise especially, I think the nerfs hurt this character a lot. It used to be a very highly rated character for me, but they just pulled so much power out of its Unite move, you really just don't have the same presence inside of team fights that you once did, which makes it feel like it's really hard to control your own destiny when playing Blastoise. Snorlax and Mamoswine both got buffs that were definitely great, but again, if you don't have a good carry to be protecting when you're playing these Pokemon, I think they're really middling choices. They can be excellent in a duo or trio queue situation where you have a carry that you can trust, but completely solo in matchmaking, there often can be very hit or miss. And then similar for all these other supports here, you know, you can be the best support player in the world, but if you don't have someone fantastic to follow around and support, they're really middling. So if you want to play any of these characters, I think they're all pretty close to reasonable, but find you someone to duo or trio with if you want to play them to their fullest extent consistently. What do you think of my list here? Are there some misses here? Would you slide people up or down? You think I covered things as they should be? I'd love to know in the comments down below. And remember, if you enjoyed this, stop back again tomorrow to see some gameplay highlights. As always, I put those out 7 days a week here on the channel with different characters. Thanks for watching, and hopefully see you again soon.